Welcome to the, what is this, September 13th, wow, 2007, meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission in the new chambers. George, will you lead us?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, approval of the minutes. Do I have any changes? Have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so that was Donna on the approval.
No, George on the approval.
George on the approval and Donna on the second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, carries unanimous. Do we have an item on consent? Does anybody wish to pull it? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and read it into the record.
I do have a question, but after just a minor question, so go ahead and read it.
Okay. Sandwich on the Green, request for preliminary plat approval of 58-lot conventional single-family subdivision to be known as Sandwich on the Green. EDC, Inc., owner, W.F. McCain and Associates, Inc., agent, located at 5010 69th Street, zoning classification RS6, single-family residential up to 6 units per acre, land use designation L2, low-density residential up to 6 units per acre, the density is 2.9.
Can't hear you.
2.96 units per acre, and this is quasi-judicial.
I'd like to pull it if I could.
You'd like to pull it? Okay. Go ahead.
I was wondering if we get a tree survey. Is this lot, it has trees on it, and you're following the landscaping ordinance, or tree ordinance, excuse me?
Yes, we did.
Is there a survey? I didn't see one in my packet.
No, we did not put a survey, the tree survey in the package. It is in the...
I think that we should have the tree survey's been done, and this is heavily wooded. If you look at the photograph, or the photo map is on the last page, it shows, the heavily wooded on the, is that the...
It's the west half.
West end?
West end.
West side. And are we approving this whole plat just with all those trees there like that? I mean, how are we handling the tree ordinance in this?
They are protected in the upland set-asides. There's 2 areas of upland set-aside, which equates to 15% of the site, which is under the code. And then there is buffers on the west and east side and north side that are also all preserved uplands.
Well, the tree ordinance was there to protect trees. And I see this design being, kind of a strange design, but I don't see any evidence in here that there's been any effort at all to save any of these trees. And I would like to table it until we get a tree ordinance or a tree survey done, and it could address some of those issues. I mean, the tree ordinance passed not to cut down all the trees and pay a fine, but to save as many trees in the county as it can.
You want to put that?
If I could make a comment, Mr. Chairman, Stan Bowling, County Planning Director. The thrust of the tree protection ordinance here really is twofold. As Stephen had mentioned, one is to get conservation areas and that are required in the heavily treated areas, but the highest degree of protection is for the specimen trees, which are hardwoods with a diameter of over 12 inches.
And there's none in here?
Well, that I don't know, but that's the kind of information you'd have with the tree survey, and that staff got with the tree survey. I don't know how many details Stephen is prepared to go into with that, or the applicant is prepared to go into, but those are the trees that have the highest protection. They have to be either relocated or mitigated, and the mitigation, of course, is twice the diameter of the tree. And they're allowed to have on-site and off-site mitigation under the code. And it sounds like, Dr. Baker, what you're interested in, especially in these sorts of situations, is to get more details about how they're meeting the tree protection ordinance.
Right. I would think that there also could be some effort in the design of this to, I mean, just to set aside 15% somewhere there, it's hard to tell where, you know, if you put the best place, but you see the lots, the way they're laid out, I mean, there's no effort by this developer to strip it.
And let me tell you, that's what our zoning gets us. Zoning will get you that.
Well, why have a tree ordinance then?
Well, the tree ordinance does achieve certain objectives, particularly in other cases, particularly in multifamily or particularly in commercial. What you've got with zoning is you've got minimum sizes, you don't have any real flexibility in zoning. What this would have to be is a PD for them to do smaller lots, for them to structure the subdivision so that it missed trees, and people don't like doing PDs because there's a lot of flexibility on the part of the governing board. But basically, and these are some of the things we're looking at through the EAR process. We talked about form-based codes and things like that, but this is what our zoning will get us most of the time. There's not the flexibility to deal with tree protection unless you go with a PD.
But this would, it looks like to me this is a perfect place to make a case, to save some trees on here. And, you know, if we don't even have a tree survey presented for us, how can we make a judgment on what is here?
Well, this meets the zoning code. Now, if this were a PD and they did small lots or multifamily on the east side of the site, they could preserve a lot of the trees. Again, the compromise is having smaller lots or multifamily, something like that, and achieving the tree protection in larger contiguous areas.
So it seems to me then we need to look at some way of putting the right type of subdivision in these treed areas then. I mean, why have a tree ordinance if we aren't saving any trees?
We are saving trees. Where we're not, we're getting mitigation. And we're saving them where the applicant has the flexibility to move things around, particularly multifamily, commercial types of sites.
And there's no flexibility. I mean, this looks like it's packed in there as much as it could possibly be. There's not any innovative thinking in this plan. Every lot, even on the untreed, is the same as the treed. I mean, there's no even attempt. I mean, I just don't see us approving something like this at this condition.
Is there anything with the tree? You said you had a tree survey. Is there anything in the tree survey, or, I mean, I assume that you all either approved it or didn't on the ordinance?
Yes, our environmental planning staff looked at it, and the majority of the trees that are required to be saved are in the two areas of upland preserve that equate to the 15%.
They're not required on the lots themselves. I thought that there was a part of the tree ordinance that said something about trees, but I mean, I tend to agree with Dick. The difference probably will be the hard part, and that is that it's not a planned development. So I mean, I'm not sure if you want objection to it would be if it didn't meet the ordinance, but I'm hearing it meets the ordinance, and so I don't know how you say, I don't particularly like the design, but I'm not sure how you say no if it's got everything and if it's met the code.
Yeah,
That's the dilemma that we face all the time, and I think that could have been a lot more creative around through the trees myself, or move them around, but I thought that there was part of the tree ordinance that dealt with trees on subdivisions on the lots, whereas that individual lot owners didn't have the same requirements when we put in a subdivision. So either that or just the trees on these lots must be smaller than we would think physically, where they go below the specimen or below a size, or he's mitigating and moving them. I mean, there must be something if it met the ordinance.
Right. You're exactly right. I think the main response to the ordinance is what Stephen has described. The ordinance does not require mitigation for pine trees, for instance, regardless of size. And so what you have, the areas where the conservation areas are put is right where the ordinance pretty much guides people because they want to minimize the mitigation they have to do. So the conservation areas are where the hardwoods are, where the oaks are on the site. The areas where there's just lots and rights-of-way and so forth are predominantly where there are pine trees, and so those are not being preserved in place.
But I agree to that. And unfortunately, I would have liked to see the pines in there too, but many people don't like the needles. But even if you take those out, I mean, there could be a little bit of care. I'm sure there's hardwoods in there in some of the other areas too. And
Certainly.
without a survey, I mean, I think we should have a survey every time.
Right, and a survey has been submitted, and the applicant can show you that tonight if the applicant wishes to speak, or we can get you all more details so that you can see how the ordinance was met.
Because all we have is this photograph, and from the photograph, it looks pretty bad.
Yes. Until you look at the survey to
If you're
see.
talking about global warming and water usage and landscaping ordinances and all this and that, this doesn't really fit it.
The specimens there are pretty small, though. I have to say they do fall under the gun sights of the ordinance, because I play golf out there all the time, and they're very small pines and some few scrub oaks. But I agree with you, Dr. Baker. It's a bloody shame to rape the place like that. But they do fall inside the ordinance.
Right.
Go ahead. I think my mic is dead, but
Is mine dead?
What luck. I mean, that's too bad.
How about now? Is it on? If those are small oaks, there's a big advantage in that they're very easy to move. Very easy to move, and we're coming up to the season where it's just, it's time's right, and it could be moved with a front end loader and a hose put on them and a little drip, and it works great.
It's a sand ridge there. It's super
Yeah.
sandy there.
So actually, a whole lot of them could be moved on each, or one or two or three maybe on each lot. And it would not be very difficult to
The trouble is,
you can do it while you're,
the trouble is, like
loader to get your,
Mr. Keating said, they still fall within the codes. They've done the ordinance, the due diligence.
You know, if you look, this is zoned for 6 units per acre. They've designed it for under 3. You know, you've got to look at the yield that they're getting.
Yeah.
The way that they can protect it is if developers are encouraged to do PDs, if they're encouraged to do extremely small lots, which there's been kind of a resistance to for some developers, you know, there needs to be trade-offs to achieve some of your objectives. To achieve tree protection, there needs to be either smaller lot, multifamily, there needs to be clustering on here. Because the landowner has a yield that he has expectations to get. And we can achieve that. But the thing is that there needs to be a recognition that there are trade-offs. To get the benefits, you have some costs.
I'm sure there's some pretty extensive mitigation for this project. Is that correct?
Yes, there is. If I may add, the applicant is moving a large number of those trees into the buffers you see on the east, west, and north sides.
Oh, great.
Those are where if you look on your aerial, you'll see the golf course has a large upland areas next to this site. And they're going to be extending those, and the applicant's also working with the golf course in removing a lot of the invasive plants that have gone into the golf course area there.
Or you could put the trees elsewhere too. I mean, I know it's expensive to move trees, but if they are small, like has been said, then it's possible.
Richard, did you want to pursue this any further, or you ready to make a motion?
The developer, Richard?
I'm just going to vote against it.
Okay.
Developer, what they're doing, Richard. Why don't you ask the developer what they're doing? I mean, you've got that option.
And the developer
Your
here.
comfort zone. Ask them for a presentation.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Chris Pontello with WF McCain and Associates. We're the engineers for the project and the agent for the applicant. There's a lot of factors that come into play when you talk about saving trees, and you know, you kind of get caught between ordinances here. Pretty much any subdivision that gets built has to be filled. You have to raise the lots up. They have to be above roads. The whole subdivision has to be above the water table. So you know, a lot of times it's easy to sit back and say, save the trees where the lots are, but if you're going to put 2 feet of fill in there, it's not very practical. We did submit a conceptual landscape plan that shows trees up front that were identified as being exceptional trees. Those trees will all be relocated, and what we're planning to do is relocate them to the buffers. You've got a kind of an odd-shaped piece of property here, and you know, these days a lot of the properties that we work with are triangular shaped or trapezoidal, and you have to understand, you know, you take 15% out for upland set aside, you take out 15 to 20% for stormwater management, and with access easements and everything, it's even more than that. And then you've got your widened buffers that we have to deal with nowadays. You're not left with much land. The allowable density here is 6 units per acre, and we're down to 2.96 already. So it doesn't leave much room for creativity. You know, we would really like to get creative with some of these, but unless you have a few hundred acres to deal with, it's really difficult to do.
So you are relocating some of the trees.
Oh, sure.
That's the point we're really interested in.
Our goal is to have as much native uplands in those buffers as we can.
Great.
And not bring in a bunch of nursery plants if we can help it.
Great.
There's a lot of scrubby stuff out there, and you know, there's pines and everything. About half the site is a grove, so there's nothing to save there. But yeah, we're gonna and like
argue with that.
Like was mentioned, we are working with the golf course to enhance the border between the subdivision and the golf course and try to clean up the exotics. And
What kind of buffer are you going to have in between the golf course and you?
well, what we've got on our conceptual landscape plan right now is just a native upland type C buffer, you know, 15 feet wide.
Great. Okay.
But along the golf course, it'll end up being wider. Some of the vegetation being on the golf course.
Just by default, yeah.
Right. There's a lot of it's already there. It just has to be cleaned up.
Depends on whether you're looking for golf balls or not.
Yeah, right. I don't have to. I always hit them straight.
So are the movement of the trees on this diagram? I just don't see them there.
That's basically an aerial. In your packet, you should have a conceptual landscape plan that shows our buffers and our upland set aside, and also a cross-section of the lake that shows the littoral zone. That's all staff really required of us at this point for preliminary plat. We are required to get detailed landscape plan approved before final plat or land development permit, I believe.
So you're putting in 1, 2, 3, 4 trees?
What's that?
Is it I'm looking at your drawing. Then is it about 4 or 5 trees that you're talking about there?
4 or 5 trees? No, those were trees that were identified as being significant. There's trees planted every, I don't know, what is it, 40 feet or so along the boundary, all the way around. And also the upland set-aside areas, there's no trees shown, but they're going to be left wooded.
Do I have a motion on this? Okay, go ahead.
I have a question on the traffic report. This project is on 69th Street, right?
Yes.
Is it between Old Dixie and 58th?
Yes.
Okay. The traffic report doesn't show any traffic from the project. It shows project impact is 0 between 58th and Old Dixie on 69th Street. If you look at 3730 East and West, and that's where I would have thought most of the traffic would be, since the entrance is on 69th.
I think it'd go down 60.
Mr. Perrano from Kimley Horn.
Thank you.
Yes, my name's Alan Parento. I'm with Kimley Horn, and I did the traffic study. The reason there isn't any traffic on there is you only have us show the volumes on the links. It meets the de minimis below the amount of trips allowed for the 2-lane and 6-lane. You're talking which link are you are you saying? I need to look at,
3730 east and west.
I guess you're right.
okay, so there's only 8% of the trips there, so the 8% on the amount of inbound, outbound trips falls below the threshold of your 8 and 15, so it's not shown on the tables.
Okay, then following that logic, why does it show 13 trips on 58th Avenue when there'll be less trips on 58th than there will be on 69th?
Well, the model has most of the trips going towards 58th as opposed,
But they're using 69th to get to 58th, aren't they?
yes.
Yeah. She's good.
Let me get the,
Sorry.
Duh.
so you're saying going towards 58th?
Well, the traffic, if the entrance to the project is on 69th Street,
Correct.
they got to be using 69th to get to 58th or to Old Dixie, and this is showing there are no trips on 69th, but there's 13 on 58th. So I don't know how they got to 58th.
I mean,
That doesn't work.
So if you would like to bring this back for the tree survey and a revised traffic report, we can probably take a look at this at the next meeting.
Okay. On the,
Well, wait a minute, time out. The tree survey has been done, and the staff has approved it, and they've said they have done it, and they have approved it. Now, and the staff has approved the traffic, so if you, I'm not sure, I think you have a question about traffic, and it's fair to have questions, but on the other hand, I'm not sure that, because of the tree survey, it needs to come back. If you want to bring it back on traffic, then that's your prerogative. But I'm not sure that, somebody cleared the traffic somewhere, so if he can figure it out, besides him. I mean, our staff did that somewhere.
Well, the tree survey does have a problem. I mean, not the tree survey, the traffic does have a problem, but the tree survey passes, unfortunately.
I mean, I
But the
think
traffic does
creativity
have-
of the design is probably what Dick said, but I'm
Yes.
afraid it passes the ordinance the way it sounds to me.
Donna, you want to go ahead and make a motion?
All right, I'll make a motion to table this to the next meeting till the traffic survey gets revised.
it's not labeled.
Okay,
It must have inadvertently got left off, I'll have to,
I'll second it.
okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Opposed?
You got that?
I was.
Mr. Hamner, again.
Okay, next item on the agenda. This is items not on consent. Vero Grove Townhomes request for major site plan approval to construct 169-unit multifamily residential development to be known as Vero Grove Townhomes. Grove Estates LLC owner, Kimley Horn and Associates, Inc., agent, located on the north side of State Road 60, west of 74th Avenue. The zoning classification on this property is RM8, residential multifamily up to 8 units per acre. Land use designation M1, medium density residential up to 8 units per acre. Density is 7.8 units per acre, and this is quasi-judicial. And Brian, I believe you're up on this one.
Thank you, Chairman Bruce. My name is Brian Freeman, Senior Planner with Indian River County. This is a request for a multifamily development to be known as Vero Grove Townhomes.
Suggestion.
The site is located on the north side of State Road 60, west of 74th Avenue, as you indicated, and it is presently zoned RM8 multifamily. The surrounding zoning for the site is mostly multifamily as well, with RM8 to the north and the east and RM6 multifamily to the west of the site. Across State Road 60 to the south of the site is a mix of multifamily, office, and also planned development zoning for Point West. This is a view an aerial view of the site and the surrounding area. And as you can see, the site is a former citrus grove, and to the north and the east of the site is the Indian River Estates residential community, and also to the west of the site is another citrus grove, which is zoned for multifamily development, but currently has not been developed. And then south of the site, across State Road 60, is, you can see the entrance into Point West. This is Point West Drive. And also you'll notice that there is a median in State Road 60 at this location, and the median is also in front of the site's entrance. And there are turn lanes presently for the entrance to Point West Drive. Looking at the layout for the site, it's a little over 21.5 acres, and there's 169 proposed units, and this results in a density of 7.8 units per acre. And looking at the traffic circulation for the site, the entrance to the project is located on State Road 60, and because of the median in State Road 60, all entrance movements and exit movements are limited to right turns only. And also at the entrance, the applicant is required to construct a westbound right turn lane, and that will need to be in place prior to issuance of the first certificate of occupancy for the development. In addition to that entrance, there's also an emergency access location, which is located in the southwest corner of the site. And this was a location that to the casual observer would not appear to be an entrance, but would be there if needed for fire rescue services. There is a single stormwater tract located in the central area of the site, and in compliance with the new landscape requirements, there are littoral zones provided in the stormwater tract. And as you can see, these are around the southern edge of the tract, adjacent to one of the recreation tracts in the project. Looking at the landscape requirements for the site, a Type B buffer, which is 25 feet wide and also includes a 6-foot opaque feature, is provided along the site's State Road 60 frontage. And this 6-foot opaque feature will consist of a berm hedge combination, and that berm is to be designed to comply with the new design requirements for a planting plateau across the top of the berm instead of just a point, if you will. And then the remainder of the site's perimeter buffer is also a Type B buffer, and this buffer is to be a native vegetation buffer, and based on an allowance in the code to install a native vegetation buffer, the width of the buffer is reduced to 15 feet. In exchange for being able to use that buffer option, the applicant is required to increase the amount of green space or recreation space within the project, and we'll look at that in just a second. And also, as part of this Type B buffer, there's a 6-foot opaque feature, which will be vegetation only, and which the buffer will create. Looking at other landscape requirements for the project, all the buffers have increased plant material to comply with the new buffer design requirements. Already mentioned the berm design changes. In addition, there's additional landscaping provided to meet the new requirements for both the non-vehicular open space areas as well as the parking areas within the site. Also, you'll notice that there is an irregular shape to the lake, and shoreline canopy trees are provided around the lake as required. And one last thing to look at is also there are limits on the use of turf grasses in the development, and essentially no more than 50% of the vegetated or landscaped area, excluding rights-of-ways and dry retention slopes, can be covered by turf grasses. Other ground covers would have to be used for the remainder. Looking at the recreation amenities to be provided within the project, there's actually 2 recreation tracts. The southern tract is surrounded by the lake and is across from the project entrance, and this tract includes a clubhouse and a swimming pool. And the second tract is to the north, and this one also includes a swimming pool and tennis courts. There is a pedestrian system consisting of internal sidewalks that extends throughout the project, and these internal sidewalks also tie into a sidewalk that will be constructed by the developer along the site's State Road 60 frontage. Looking at required improvements for the site, there is a right-of-way dedication that is required, and as this project is being handled by the I should say, as the widening of State Road 60 is being handled by the DOT, that dedication will be done by the applicant to the state for that right-of-way for State Road 60. And then also looking at the green space or recreation space requirements, the minimum requirement for the site has been increased from 7.5% to 10% of the site area based on the use of the native vegetation buffers. And the amount proposed by the applicant is actually 16.8%, which is above that requirement. And this area includes the recreation tracks as well as the common green areas, which are accessible via the sidewalks throughout the project. Based on this analysis, staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission grant major site plan approval for Vero Grove Townhomes with the conditions listed in the staff report.
Thank you, Brian. Does anybody up here have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead.
Actually, it's relatively minor, I think. In the traffic circulation, it says that a westbound right turn lane will be provided or required at the project's entrance. It says that no other off-site improvements are required. I do notice in the plans, though, there is a deceleration lane. Is that is the applicant required to put the deceleration lane in?
Well, the deceleration lane, I believe, is the westbound right turn lane at the project entrance. I mean, essentially, it would serve as a deceleration lane for trips coming into the project.
I was thinking about a westbound acceleration lane. Is there a westbound acceleration lane required?
No, just a decel lane.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you. Excuse me.
Anybody else? Have a motion?
I'd move to adopt as presented by staff.
Okay. Second from Richard. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Next item on the agenda is Ocean Sands, request for preliminary PD plan plat approval for a 60-unit multifamily residential development to be known as Ocean Sands. MGD Development of Florida II LLC, owner Kimberly Horn and Associates Inc., agent, located within the overall Florida Beach Resort, which is Disney PD, zoning classification RM6, residential multifamily up to 6 units per acre. Land use designation L2, low density 2, up to 6 units per acre, and this is quasi-judicial. And I don't think we've done this yet, but we need to have a swearing in. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm losing my papers here. Who's going to do this? John.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Bruce. John McCoy with the County Planning Department. This is another project that was previously approved. This preliminary plat was, preliminary PD was previously approved. It has since expired, and there's a conceptual approval that is still in force and effect for this property. As far as the location, it's located on the North Barrier Island, just south of Florida's, or Disney's Florida Beach Resort, and the subject site there is in the darker color, and it's zoned RM6. To the south of the subject site is Sea Oaks. To the west is A1A, and then some scattered single and multifamily. The next slide shows the original conceptual plan, which showed 5 large buildings on this site. And the southern portion of the conceptual plan, as this one depicts, was approved for up to 163 residential units. The updated conceptual plan shows the layout as proposed, and the proposed PD is consistent with the conceptual plan as shown. The next slide shows an overall aerial, and it's to give you a view of the surrounding properties and what the surrounding uses are. Again, to the north is the Florida Beach Resort. To the south is Sea Oaks. To the west, it shows the residential development that's occurred there. The next aerial is a detail of the subject site with the aerial overlaid over the subject site to give you an idea about how the site plan and the site improvements fit on the subject site. Again, you have the Sea Oaks to the house, you have their dune homes. Their structures are much closer to the ocean. These structures will be closer to A1A. You've got the Florida Beach, or Florida's Disney Resort to the north. Those roofs are green, hard to pick out on the aerial. and then you have A1A and the residential development to the west of A1A. This shows the development. The buildings are in the teal color, and it's 5 residential structures that are depicted. It's 60 units on 9.9 acres, works out to just a little over 6 units per acre. In the staff report, I've given you all a fair amount of detail on the density calculations. With the commercial property to the north, that raises the density, and the density is based on the overall conceptual plan. At 60 units, it's much less dense than what the original conceptual plan proposed. As far as parking, there's 120 spaces required. There's 162 spaces provided. The majority of the spaces are under the building, and that's why you don't see them in that brown on the site plan. So it's guest parking that's provided essentially outside the building, but the majority of the parking is provided underneath the building. And again, that's another way you have less impact and less footprint on the environment, and a more compact development proposal.
So these units are on pillars? That's what you're telling me essentially?
Yes, they're elevated, and they'll have a basement and a pile construction, yes.
Why do you say it's less impact?
Because you're not spreading out parking all over the front of the building or the back of the building, so you have more opportunities for green space and tree preservation.
There's less asphalt and
so you've got more of a vertical footprint rather than spread that parking out.
It looks pretty compact.
It is.
It is. And the white area is also green area, so there's more green area than actually shows on the slide. As far as traffic circulation, the traffic impact analysis is approved. The applicants have actually paid their impact fees quite a while ago, and they actually pay for more units than they're proposing now. So they've actually vested for more units than they're actually proposing at this point. There are existing southbound left turn lane and a northbound right turn lane. As far as stormwater management, it's a series of exfiltration trenches that are linked under the parking lot, and then a small, dry stormwater tract at the south end, and that's in the very light blue at the south end of the parking lot and the south end of that south building. This is the tree relocation plan. The green dots indicate some of the trees, again, for relocation into the buffers, and the applicant's proposing to relocate all the live oaks and all the palms on the site that are feasible. We'll be relocating to those to the green areas, the buffers, and general green areas. As far as the landscape and preservation plan, the light green area, and they're doing most of their or all of their preservation to the east. And the conservation area from the previous plan is slightly larger. It was 1.89 acres, and now it's 1.94. So it's grown just slightly, but it's the light green area you see, and the gap you see in it is the access to the beach. The west perimeter buffer is a type B buffer with a 6-foot opaque feature, and the south is a type A buffer adjacent to the residential property to the south.
Excuse me, what is the east going to be? What is that, just going to be left as is?
It'll be left as is, which is a mix of dune-type vegetation.
Dune vegetation, okay,
yes.
Thank you.
John?
Yes.
Is this on now? Yeah, okay. What is feasible? Is that based on age and size, a combination? What determines what's feasible to move?
I'll let the applicant address that a little bit in more detail, but what's feasible relates to one size, health is another thing, and then also sometimes it's configuration. If you get a tree that's very weathered and it's all leaning to one side, a physical characteristic, or it's intertwined with a lot of nuisance exotics. Sometimes those don't transplant well, but that talks to the feasibility, and they did have an arborist go in and catalog, so they've done that work as to which ones they believe they can move.
Thank you.
And that does get us to our recommendation, which is recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission grant preliminary PD approval with the conditions in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I know this property's been rather contentious in the past, but it looks like it's been changed quite a bit to appease the neighbors in the area. Does anybody have any questions? And having said that, have the neighbors been notified?
Yes, they have. The applicant's actually been working with the neighbors on an ongoing basis on this project, And there's also an Ocean Sands West, where the applicant's been working with the North Beach Barrier Island Task Force on that property as well. So you'll see that coming to you soon, but they've been in contact with.
Okay, great. I know Disney always does a good job, but,
No, this is not Disney.
This is not
The
Disney.
successor development.
this is not, that's what I'm saying.
No.
Disney
The
does a
last
good
three
job, but
times
this
we
is
saw
not
it, they were all
Disney.
here, so they've not.
This is not Disney, and we're just,
No, we're in good shape there.
And the staff also notified North Bear Island on all of our correspondences, and they would have gotten a copy of the staff report.
I just wanted to match
I can't.
the good northern neighbors.
John, I should have called y'all during the week, and I'm sorry for this, but what is the time frame on the conceptual plan? Because this is now, it's what, did we do this, was it 2-3 years ago? I mean, it's been a while. It's been 4 years ago. The hurricanes, it was,
The
what,
conceptual plan was the original.
this is still working on the Disney conceptual plan?
It was modified, updated in,
That was when
I
we
think,
had the
2003 to
cabanas,
modify
where we
it.
had the place with the cabanas. That's when we modified it last.
That was a modification, so that plan is still in force and effect.
Is there, it just is,
As long as they're
the
pursuing,
conceptual plans run out, let's put it that way. Is there a time
It's
frame on
timed
the
out.
conceptual plan?
not once construction's commenced, it's a matter of coming back
That's
in
what I
and
couldn't remember.
modifying.
Okay, that's right. Once they start, then it's, okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a couple questions. When we saw this a number of years ago, there were some questions about the conservation easement, and it cut across one of the buildings, or it was, has that been remedied? Because I don't see the conservation easement on the drawings.
That
Yes,
was-
and it's on the slide, it's the area in the.
It is the
green.
area in the teal. Okay,
Area
all
is-
right. And one other question, there was a discussion, rather lengthy discussion, about the cabanas. The cabanas are still part of this project?
The cabanas are not, and they've been modified, and they're no longer cabanas, but there are 6 basically changing rooms by the pool.
Okay. Those are the only questions I had. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Has there been a survey for any threatened or endangered plants on the property?
Yes, there has been, and there were no gopher tortoises. There's an excerpt of it. I believe we attached it.
It's toward the end of the packet.
Mickey
back
Mouse
there
is
and-
not endangered, right?
There were some endangered plants which the applicant is looking at relocating to the buffer areas that are relocated. But they talked about the sea turtles, and obviously they're going to obey the sea turtle lighting, and there's no scrub jays. They've indicated that there's no gopher tortoise, and originally it was looked at for the beach mouse, so there's no beach mouse. But there are several listed plants which the applicant is proposing to relocate to the buffers where those plants are found.
This is the last piece.
It looks like all the buildings are behind the coastal construction line except for and the swimming pool crosses over. Am I reading?
I believe the swimming pool and possibly the clubhouse.
Okay.
Does that has to get a variance from DEP, doesn't it?
They'll have to get a permit, yes, for those.
So on the shoestring fern, and for instance, they're going to be moving the palms and things that have the shoestring fern?
That's correct. Yeah, they've put a lot of work into the environmental survey,
The
and
butterfly orchids are going to, the trees that contain those are going to be moved?
that's correct. That's,
Yeah, this property was on actually the LAC list.
Right.
Yeah,
And
one time it was.
Well, and then it just was priced out of sight, unfortunately.
I have one question of John.
Because that's the last piece.
Are you finished, Dr. Baker?
Yes.
I have one question, John. Why is dry stormwater retention area, why is the dry area allowed instead of wet?
it deals with the hydrology of the site, and essentially, if you were to go deep enough to have a wet retention, it would be salt water at this area.
Okay.
So with the good percolation on the beach sand, the dry retention just makes more sense
Thank you.
from that standpoint.
Anybody else? Do I have a motion on this?
I'd move approval as presented.
Second.
Okay, that's George and Greg. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed?
Yeah, I'm opposed, but I can't do anything about it.
Okay, so it carries unanimously. Okay, we're on the public hearings end of things. I suppose you pronounce this Kalinas. Is that correct? Huh? Kalinas? Kalinas Daycare requests for special exception use approval for child care facility to be known as Kalinas Daycare. Helen Jackson, owner, Kenneth Jackson, agent, located at 3981 45th Place, zoning classification RS6, residential single family up to 6 units per acre. Land use designation L2, low density residential up to 6 units per acre. And this is quasi judicial. Who's doing this? Steve.
Hi. Thank you, Chairman Bruce. Stephen Dearduff, Community Development. As you stated, this is a child care facility in the RS zoning district, which is a special exception use. Requires regulation in scale, duration, or nature to avoid adverse impacts on the surrounding properties. It's also required to meet general site plan criteria and specific LDR criteria, and requires approval by the Board of County Commissioners. The location is at 45th Place, just, excuse me, 1 block north of 45th Street, a paved highway. Here's an aerial showing the general vicinity, and I've highlighted the house that is proposed to become the daycare center. The existing house is a single-family residence, and the applicant proposes to convert that to a daycare. He proposes a recreation on the upper left-hand corner. Based on the size of the facility, he would be limited to roughly 15 children and 2 employees. As required by LDR 971, he's required to have a Type C buffer around the outdoor recreation areas, and this also requires a 6-foot opaque feature. In addition, all parking must be buffered between him and abutting properties, and all existing trees are to be remain on site. In fact, the circular driveway was designed to protect the large oak tree in the front. Staff posted required sign on the site, giving notice of today's public meeting. Staff contacted surrounding property owners by letter. A notice was published in the Press Journal, and staff received 3 phone calls on the letters, all in support of the facility. Staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the site plan approval for the daycare to the Board of County Commissioners with the conditions listed in the staff report. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Does anybody have any questions of Steve?
I do.
Surprise.
Sorry. We're seeing a lot of these requests for daycare centers, and this is in the middle of a single-family subdivision. I mean, we're not talking, it's not on a major road. It's limited access. The homes are close together. I don't understand why we're seeing these, why we're even entertaining these. Could you kind of like bring me up to date on what the philosophy is on this?
The philosophy.
Does that exist in the code?
Kids need to be cared for. I guess that's one part of the philosophy. And the other is that it is actually pretty traditional to have these types of uses in residential areas. But you're right, most of the facilities that we see are actually quite a bit larger than this and are directly off of a major thoroughfare, but in a residentially zoned area. There are a few areas in the county where these smaller ones are more back into the neighborhoods, and the county has the discretion to approve those. But you bring up a good point. This one is off of a local road. It's a block, half a block really, off of 45th Street, which is a major thoroughfare. And in this particular area, in the Gifford area, there's generally a high number of kids there, and there's kind of traditionally been a number of these smaller daycares that are converted homes, and they're a smaller scale. So I would say it's actually customary in this particular area, but they are small, and they're small scale. And that's why it's allowed to go forward, and the board does have the discretion to approve these off of local roads. I think it would definitely be a concern if it were, several lots put together and it was a large-scale facility off of a local road like this. But it is, converting a single-family house that's the same size as the other houses in the neighborhood, so the scale is appropriate, in staff's opinion.
And I understand that you're not changing the scale of the house, but you've got 15 children. That means cars coming in and cars leaving twice a day.
Right. Or children walking.
Hopefully they're walking from the neighborhood.
Right. Which is why I'm just saying we tend to see these in the higher density, the only places really, the higher density areas where you tend to have that phenomenon happen, which is good if a lot of them can get there on foot.
What is the age group of the kids? 1 through 4. I mean, needless to say, I tend to agree with Stan in the sense that you may have 3 or 4 more of these, but they've asked for a permit.
Whereas the others just
put them up. There may be more like this around, so.
And I don't know many 1 to 4 year olds that are walking to school in the morning, so they are being taken by parents.
Mothers will take them.
I think the interesting thing about this one is that there seems to be quite an amount of notification that staff did prior to this evening, and you've gotten positive responses and apparently no negative concerns from the neighbors that surround the area.
That is correct.
What's the zoning on the backside of that where it's vacant lots now?
That is also RS6.
RS6?
And and not far to the east in this area is RM10, which is a lot of the area to the east is zoned RM10, and it's still single family, but even higher density.
I've done this dance before, right? So you're going to hear the same thing. The last time we did this, I did the dance with the safety of the kids, toddlers walking around and nowhere to drop them off with. So that's my big concern is in an open subdivision like that with the kids, toddlers 1 to 4 running around. I just have a real concern about that again. That's my dance.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We've remodeled a house in this area. It might have been right there, actually. That could be it. But this subdivision loops around. You have to be going quite slowly here. And I feel strongly that we need to have more really young child care facilities in residential neighborhoods. It's much more appropriate, much more comfortable for children to be in these small settings. So I don't think we should put undue burdens on people who would like to start these. Thank you.
Any other comments before we open up the public hearing? Seeing none, I'm going to open the public hearing. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You do need to state your name and address for the record.
My name is Kenneth Jackson. The daycare is my mom's. And the reason this come about, I happen to work for the government this year, would have been 21 years. On the base, watching the daycare facilities there, where you got 300 and 400 kids, it's a horrible situation. When I had my daughter, my mom is great with her and great with kids all together. So, it's a perfect situation for, it's right next to my parents' house. That's the best thing about it. But it's a good thing for the neighborhood. People know my mom and trust her, and it's not going to get where you got 30 and 40 kids. Because now I want to keep it where it's one-on-one attention with the kids, and it works out better.
How many staff members are you going to have, sir?
3, I think.
3?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to plea with you to have someone out there when they drop off the kids and pick them up. So the kids won't be wandering out into the street. It's one of my concerns.
That's a must. But like she stated, that street, cars come through there, but it's not at a fast pace. And that's the reason we put the circular driveways so they can come up, and pull up out of the road, and make sure they go inside the house.
But you know why they call kids, right?
Yeah, I know. I got it. She's 3, so.
Kids have a way of wandering off. So just be aware, if you'd please, be aware of my concerns with the safety and have someone out there all the time when they're loading or unloading. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else from the public? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
I'd move approval as presented.
Okay, George?
I second.
Richard? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Okay,
Make that 2, please. I just think it's inappropriate location.
okay, both of you need to state.
Inappropriate neighborhood, I mean, it's just,
I think I do think it's inappropriate for the neighborhood also.
Okay. Passes, 5-2. All right. Next item on the agenda, consideration of proposed amendments to Chapter 911, 915 of the Land Development Regulations to implement comprehensive plan changes to FLU Policy 5.8. This is the Ag PDs, and this is legislative, and I believe Stan's going to do the presentation.
Yep. Good evening. This is an amendment that's proposed to the Land Development Regulations, and it is essentially updating our land use regulations to make them in concert with the comprehensive plan. Back in March, the comprehensive plan policy for agricultural PDs was amended, and that policy has regulations essentially that are in place and in effect, and the land development regulations now need to be updated to be consistent and to implement those policies. So this is essentially an update, and back in March when the ag policies were proposed, you all had input into that. And they did a few things. One was they eliminated the maximum lot size that we had in ag PDs and eliminated the clustering of lots requirement that we had. It eliminated the requirement. Clustering can still occur through the PD process. It also allows golf courses to be used fully for open space and to count toward project density, overall site density. So golf course could be part of an ag PD. It also mandated use of best management practices, so that's in the adopted policy. And it also added a stipulation that the recreational uses that can go into an ag PD not be nuisance type. We talked about racetracks and things like that, so that's in the comprehensive plan now. And if you could go to the document, Cameron, we'll see if how this still works. And this is from the. Let's see if it becomes readable. It's like magic ink. It comes back.
wow,
I hadn't done that trick in a while.
I don't know how you do that.
Yeah. So there are 7 things, and this is out of the staff report, that the land development regulations that are proposed do. One is to require a minimum lot size of 1 acre. That's straight out of the comprehensive plan policy. The other is to require open space to be provided in contiguous areas, and there are different types of open space. And there could be more than one open space area, but they do need to be in areas that are contiguous. Requires open spaces to be established by easements and to ensure that there's no development on those spaces in the future that's not compatible with open space. Fourth is to require deed restriction to be enforceable by the county or some other method that's enforceable by the county. The 5th item is to require applicants to identify best management practices. And those can vary from project to project. Every project should have best management practices, at least for stormwater management, but there may be other kinds of uses, such as golf courses, that would have their own set of best management practices, and those would be required. They'd have to be identified by the applicant. And actually, as a PD, you all would see those types of proposed practices on each individual project. 6 is also part of the best management practice regulation as proposed, that not only are the best management practices put in place at the time of approval, but they may need to be modified. The practices may evolve over time and get better, so it allows some flexibility on that side of things. And the 7 is just a prohibition on recreational uses that could be deemed a nuisance. So the county would have the authority to scrutinize that for any project that comes through. The Professional Services Advisory Committee has looked at these proposed changes as to 2 areas in the code, Chapter 911, which deals with ag PDs. There's a section there, and also the section in Chapter 915, our plan development section. And they recommended unanimously that the Board of County Commissioners adopt these proposed regulations, and that's staff's recommendation as well, that you all recommend that the board adopt the proposed ordinance. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you have, and just a reminder, this is a public hearing, so there may be some who wish to speak.
Thank you, Stan. Do we have any questions from up here?
I was interested in the nuisance recreational vehicle. How do you, how do you define a nuisance recreational vehicle?
You all may be addressing that when the first project goes.
It's a fast-moving rooster.
It's a motorcycle.
Oh, we're going to get a letter on that one. Okay, any other?
I have one question, Stan. In this packet, which one of these has the final wording?
Yeah, the final wording is the attachment.
So
You're
that's
talking
one?
about for the policy itself that was
Yes.
adopted? Right, policy 5.8. Actually, I had it out.
Is it the last one, attachment 5?
That's the one,
No,
remember
actually-
the whiteouts and the blackouts you all wanted? It's on attachment 5, isn't it?
It is attachment 3, which has, at the bottom of it, adopted 3/6/2007.
Okay.
Well, they're out of order, actually, but, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so this is the final wording,
That's correct.
attachment 3.
Correct.
Okay.
It is a bit confusing in the packet because with the background, there was another version, I think, of the, when it was proposed, so that you all could see the discussion on that.
In the original wording here, there was discussion regarding the contiguity of the open space, but I don't see that mentioned in here on attachment 3.
That terminology is used in the third bullet of policy 5.8. It says the open space shall be in contiguous areas and must be under the control of an appropriate entity and maintained in perpetuity.
Okay, mine says the open space area must be under the control of a single entity and maintained in perpetuity through an open space recreation, conservation, and/or agricultural preservation easement. It says nothing about contiguity in my copy.
I guess we don't have the,
Let me put that back up on the camera.
Can you back that off a little bit? Okay, that's not what this says on attachment 3 then.
That's not what we have.
That's not what we have.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. This is the lower left-hand corner of the attachment 3 that I have. I know that doesn't do you any good.
Look at attachment 5, Donna. That's why.
That's why I was thinking was attachment 5.
Right, but his version is cleaned up. Ours has got the cross, the.
ours says revised 2/20/2007.
Okay, that wording's okay with me.
Right.
And I just couldn't find that in the attachment we were discussing.
Okay, well, take a look at that to try to make it clear for the board. I know we tried to put in there the discussion that you all had, because you all definitely had input into some of the wording changes that, in the policy itself.
And this says contiguous areas, plural, which means it doesn't have to be in one contiguous area within the PD. Is there anything that says, how many areas we can use? I mean, are they like 2 people's backyards for one and 2 people's backyard for another? And this was what we got into when we originally discussed this.
We did, and I think it was purposely left the way that it's worded to allow some flexibility. So you're really going to be looking at that issue of, first of all, what's the purpose of the open space?
That's what I was going to ask. Is the intent established somewhere within this?
Right. Well, I think the intent before the policy change was that the open space area would be very large, and all the development would be clustered. So there was a purpose to basically one open space that would remain rural in character, maybe be large enough to farm. But that's changed now. That's not required now. So you could have different purposes for the open space. You could still have that same pattern. Someone could still propose that, but they'd have to have lots at least 1 acre in size now under the current policy. So there may be different purposes for the open space. If it's conservation, then you'd want to look that it's large enough for a conservation purpose. And there may be several areas that aren't contiguous, that you'd
So
want to
each
do that.
project will come forward on its own merits at the PD hearing?
I think that's what it'll have to be, because you could have different purposes.
I think the key point here, too, is that it is a PD, and so it's a negotiation process, so.
This actually is making it more flexible than it was in the past, and which will probably help maybe some creative designing around trees or whatever that we couldn't do before.
Exactly.
I think this is a good change.
Any other comments up here before I open the public hearing? Okay, seeing none, I'm sure we have some comments from the public.
No.
Who is that masked man?
It's okay.
Is your last name Public?
Joe.
Joe Public.
My name's Joe Public. We brought this forward with the comp plan changes probably almost a year ago and worked very closely with staff. And you all have seen this and given us some input, and we included that. And it's been before the county commission, and I think we came out with a good product, and we support what staff has brought forward 100%. I think this will make it more applicable for people to try and do ag PDs out there. And with the variety that we can do, I think we're going to be able to save almost all the trees we could possibly save by being able to function around, and move them around quite a bit without changing the density. So I think it's a good change, and I think you're going to see a lot more people trying to use it. So I support staff 100% on this.
Thank you.
I just want to be able to support staff on it.
Name and address for the record.
Pardon me?
Your real name.
Real name and address.
Joseph Paladin.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Under discussion, Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Mr. Glenn, would you educate me on the third paragraph where it says common open space areas shall be provided as opposed to must be provided? Explain to this commenter what shall and must, what's the difference between the two?
Are you looking at the open space shall be in contiguous areas? Is that what you're looking at?
Why did you change it from must to shall? Can you educate this poor guy, this poor southern boy?
I look at it as having the same meaning, that they're both obligating the staff to do the same thing. You shall do this, you must do this. I don't see a distinction.
I don't see any distinction either. That's why I asked where you should change it, because I've been through this dance 100 times with the city. Must is very clear to me. That's a absolute, crystal clear, you have to do it thing. Shall is...
In the Ten Commandments, did you ever see it? You must not. It was always you shall. So, I mean, that's it.
We don't want to go into that depth. I'm not going to tip my water into that, my toe into that
definitions.
Well, I think either one could be used. Shall is consistent with the language that's used in the land development regulations, and I think that's why
you're doing consistency change as opposed to some generic.
I don't think we have a must. I don't think the term must is used in the LDRs. I know shall is throughout, so I think that's...
Okay, you gave me a comfort zone.
Do I remember...
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question of staff? And I should have brought this up, but I'm just so curious. Future land use element policy 14.3 requires one of 4 criteria to be met before you can amend the comp plan. Is that correct? In this case, we chose the proposed amendment as warranted based on substantial change in circumstances affecting the subject property.
Right.
And so I can understand the background where we're saying that, citrus grove production is down and we're losing our citrus and we need to have alternatives, and thus the idea of having sort of like recreation PDs. But how does that sort of rationally relate to the idea of eliminating max lot sizes in the clustering requirement?
Well, I think what the comp plan change did was it gave more flexibility. It did away with the requirement, although, again, a design could still serve those purposes. But it definitely opened up designs that don't do all those things, I think, as a way of allowing some alternatives, in the agricultural areas.
Because I've heard a commissioner already point out that, it's not even for certain whether contiguous areas is going to be one large contiguous area where it's going to be several, and then the question is if you have several contiguous, is it really meeting the definition? I thought it looked fine, but I was just sort of just questioning how doing away with clustering and ag land and eliminating the max lot size sort of related to the idea of citrus production being down.
It makes it more flexible. I mean, that was as I remember the discussion, it's in all candor, George, it just simply makes the potential, I guess, for if someone goes out of citrus into development, it made it more flexible, and the design criteria would be more creative. And you heard us talk about form-based, which is very different from this, but it's kind of moving toward flexibility. I frankly was stunned.
If you want to believe that.
Do you have a motion? You have a motion, Ms. Donna.
One motion. Okay. We have a motion on the floor in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Passes unanimously. Commissioner matters, anybody have any items to discuss?
I'd like, if I might, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Keating, Dr. Adair was at the last meeting, and we had that thing where he was having concerns with the Grove, et cetera, et cetera. Where does that stand? Has he appealed that to the board?
Yes, he did.
He did appeal that?
And we will be taking that, I think, October 2nd, is it? The first meeting in October.
Okay.
Board.
That's correct. I believe that Mr. Adair is still talking with the developer about potential buffer designs, but an appeal has been filed.
But he did file the...
Yes, appeal has been filed, and it will be processed. I'm just saying it's conceivable if they work something out between them, it may not go forward, but it was filed and it will be processed.
For October...
October 2nd.
2nd.
Board meeting.
Thank you, sir.
Any other
Thank you,
items?
Mr. Chairman.
Seeing none, planning matters.
Other than the appeal update, which just gave you the one other appeal item that I did want to update you on, is this last Tuesday, the Board of County Commissioners heard the Montessori School appeal on 8th Street, 63rd Avenue. You all approved it, and your approval was appealed by some adjacent owners of adjacent properties, and that was heard by the board, and they unanimously approved, basically affirmed your decision. They did not overturn your decision, but they did add two conditions to the approval, and one was to limit the number of children to 81, or number of students to 81, which is what they were proposing, but that set the scale, and it cannot be changed or expanded unless that condition is modified in the future by the board. And that was really the main item. There's one other condition that they put on was that the regular program of the school be held on weekdays, Monday through Friday, so that it wouldn't expand as a full program into evening hours or into to weekend hours. So those were the two conditions, and that was all that I had to update you on.
Is it just happenstance that we're getting all these daycare things here lately? I mean, it's just...
Must be a market for it.
Probably.
I'm sorry?
Montessori.
A lot of people out of work.
No, it's not. They just got the, are you talking about, the Montessori school is in operation. I'm not sure where their existing location is. And I understand, I think from what I recall from the discussion that I've heard before, and Tuesday they have around 40 to 50 students right now. At the location
that was approved, when does operation start there? When do operations start there?
They'll have to get their site plan released, get their permits, make the site improvements. They're hoping to be in by spring, possibly summer.
It'll be interesting to see how that sits a year from now then.
See that happen. Okay. George?
Well, I inserted a little memo in your packet. Apparently someone last meeting tried to tell you that there's language in the code that might give discretion to this commission to add conditions sort of at the last second, sort of subjectively. And as I was referenced to a Florida Supreme Court case from 2001, a local government agency may deny a plat application only if the agency demonstrates that the applicant failed to meet the objective legal requirements for approval. So the point is that going forward, it's probably best to limit your conditions based on what's in front of you in the code and not to try to perhaps come up with new conditions based on the circumstances.
Can you address the health, safety, and welfare aspect of that?
Yeah, I was going to go there, too. You read that at Dr. Adair's...
I did. That's where it came up. It seems that the statute, the code provision seems to imply that if you find a threat to health, safety, and welfare, that you can add a regulatory action onto it. I think that's suspect, because it looks like it starts becoming subjective at the last second.
All codes are subjective. That's why you have them.
Right. But if it's printed and if it's already laid out and it specifies where you can address the issues, that's more objective criteria in nature. What's written down, what can be verified, simply.
But it was very pertinent for Dr. Adair's position because of the ag.
And that's what I thought. That's why that's why I read the provision to you, and that's why I gave indication that, based on that specific set of circumstances, that code provision could apply. But
where is that specific code located?
91307 4H2.
Okay, thank you, sir.
And the court case.
Do we need to look at changing that, or do?
Yes, I think we do. I agree with you 100%. That's exactly what we need to do.
Now, I also point out in my memo, there's two situations where this could be applicable. In a PD, where we do have discretion to place conditions, sort of negotiate horse trade with the property owner, a PD takes into consideration both plat regulations and site plan regulations. So in that context, it actually is acceptable.
Yeah, I can agree with that, but I agree with you, it's very vague, it's arbitrary, but that's the way laws are, that's why you have laws. But, I mean, Ms. Keyes and I both are kind of suspect of this.
There's a city in this county whose code says that you have to comply with certain requirements and any other reasonable conditions deemed appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, Broward County didn't have that wording in their LDR, so they couldn't get away with it. If we add that wording to our LDRs, then I think that there's a real good possibility that possibly we wouldn't have that problem.
I will certainly do more research into the situation to see what exactly Broward County's failure, what exactly their language that got them in trouble. I would also state, though, that whether it's local codes, state statutes, or even federal regulations, it is full of rules that would be held unconstitutional should it be challenged.
Yeah.
So just because you find it in a book of ordinances or statutes certainly doesn't mean that it's legal or justified.
Agreed.
Well, maybe we can find
You'll look at that for us, though, and next meeting you'll have some clarification or some more an opinion for that, for whether we need to look at or changing it. Would you do that for us?
I sure will.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, George.
Any
Thank you,
other
Mr.
items?
Chairman.
We're adjourned.